People with an ex who threatened to kill themselves over a breakup. How did that turn out? Story 1. I was with a girl once, and we were on the rocks for a while, breaking up, then getting back together, until it got quite toxic. One day I finally decided that was it and called it quits. I used to work in retail, and she knew my shifts. She came to my work to buy essentials, even though my workplace was 20 minutes further from her closest shops. I served her politely and kept it civil, which surprised her because I would usually give in, and we'd confess our love and get back together. After that happened, she left the store. Back then, we weren't allowed to have mobile phones on shift, so she blew up my phone with messages and calls saying things like how I embarrassed her, etc. I got off the shift, saw my phone, and ignored her messages. A couple of hours later, when I got home, I finally decided to answer one of her calls to tell her to leave me alone. She told me she was in the hospital and had attempted to take her life. I was shocked and asked which hospital and if I could come. She said no. I kept pressing for details, but she avoided answering and tried to talk about getting back together. I was about 90% sure she was faking it. I told her I would be there for her as a friend, but I wouldn't get back with her for the sake of my health and sanity. I hung up and called her friends to let them know what had happened. They were shocked and began calling her. The next day, I got confirmation that she had faked it all, and that was the moment I knew I made the right choice. Story 2. Back in the 90s, I broke up with her for many reasons. She had lied to me about a lot, manipulated me, got caught, and crossed boundaries I told her not to. So I told her it was over. I was 18, she was 23. She threatened to end her life. A neighbor found her in her garage sitting in a car with the engine running. I got a call and arrived as the ambulance pulled up. I went to the hospital. She was going to be fine. Her family treated me like I was the one at fault. I told her goodbye, told her she needed help, and left. I never saw her again. About 6 months later, I got a letter, but I just threw it away. That was also about 6 months after my dad had ended his own life after learning he had terminal colon cancer. He got drunk. He was an alcoholic and gambling addict who had ruined his life and shot himself using the pistol my mom had bought him for Christmas a few years earlier. He had been a cop, so I had no tolerance for that kind of emotional manipulation. She had her family, and I knew they would take care of her. Story 3. I stayed somewhat firm, but didn't kick her out immediately. After realizing she couldn't change my mind, she threatened again, and after a lot of chaos, having to hold her back, take away anything dangerous, break into my own bathroom to get the razors, she eventually ran to the balcony and pretended to choke herself unconscious. Thankfully, my roommate noticed how overwhelmed I was and pulled me aside. He said she was okay and told me to leave the apartment and call 911. They showed up, immediately recognized what was happening, gave her firm instructions, and admitted her with affidavits signed by both me and my roommate. She came back to the apartment only a few hours later and continued trying to reconcile. I had to keep telling her no, and even contacted her parents to come get her so I wouldn't have to involve the police again. They finally agreed. A week or two earlier, I'd given the same ultimatum, and they told me to call the cops. I felt incredibly guilty about the whole thing. I hate seeing people hurting. She eventually got picked up and left. I ignored all her calls and texts until one day, about a month or two later, she called me from another number. She asked how we were going to get through everything as a couple. I had to make it very clear again that we weren't together over the course of about 30 minutes. 6 years later, she reached out again and apologized, saying she had finally received proper help. I forgave her, but we haven't really talked since. She seems to be happily engaged to someone else in another city now, and I wish her nothing but the best. Story 4. My ex was pretty unstable. When it was clear that our relationship was ending, she kept threatening to end her life if I left her. The night I broke up with her, she grabbed my car keys and tried to run out the door, saying she was going to drive my car off a big bridge down the road. I had to restrain her in a bear hug until I could grab the keys out of her hand. Once I let go, she started hitting me and threw a glass lamp at my head. She wouldn't stop attacking me to get the car keys. It escalated to me pinning her on the floor and just lying on top of her while she punched, bit, and scratched me. I called 911. By the time the police arrived, she had tired herself out, and we were both covered in my blood. I thought I might be arrested for domestic violence, but thankfully she told them the truth, and it helped that I was the only one with visible injuries. I explained her suic threats. They took her to the psych ward for 72 hours, and I spent the night cleaning blood out of the carpet. I packed up my things and disappeared before she got out. It was her name on the lease, so I stayed with friends until I found my own place. The last time we spoke, she was angry at me for getting her sent to the hospital. She said I should have known she wasn't actually going to do anything. I was just glad she could admit that it was all meant to manipulate me. Last I heard, she's still alive and still unstable, many years later. Story 5. I was 19 and trying to end things. He had become controlling, and I found his escalating behavior embarrassing and uncomfortable. I had never been exposed to domestic violence, so I didn't know what to do. It just felt gross and unsettling at first. One evening, things blew up. He called my mom and told her I was driving under the influence. I was completely sober in an attempt to control me. There was also a lot of verbal abuse in public at his work function. I ended up locking myself in the bathroom at his parents' house while they were away. I was trying to get help, but he threatened to shoot me through the door with his dad's gun if I didn't come out, then said he'd take his own life. Everything had just flipped. Though looking back, it's less surprising. He was very serious. So I pretended everything was fine, told him I was wrong and silly, and we ended up sleeping with the gun nearby. A week later, I broke up with him over text while he was on a road trip with his parents. His mom told my mom that he threw himself out of the moving car. He's still alive. And I quote, "I don't blame Finney for not wanting him. His mother was abusive in every way. My family are usually the ones who tell me what they've heard about him, and it usually involves drug abuse and other issues. It's really sad to think about. He could have and should have had a beautiful life." Story 6. My ex-wife did this. When we were dating, she was cheating with several people. When I found out, I broke up with her. I was tired of the fake apologies and the lack of change. Then my bass player called, saying she showed up at his house bleeding from slitting her wrists. I went over, felt sorry for her, picked her up and brought her home. We had to do a sort of homemade rehab and she sobered up. We had 2 kids, but she kept cheating while I was at work. Less than a year after our second baby was born, she was still being unfaithful. I finally hit my breaking point and divorced her. We co-parent now, and it's frustrating because she continues to be verbally abusive and constantly threatens legal action to take the kids whenever I confront her about neglect or about her new husband being abusive to them. I'm the better parent and have had the kids 75% of the time since the divorce. I've had to call CPS on the stepdad, but nothing happens because she can compose herself and act non-threatening for short periods. She used to be a fashion model, and when people talk to her, they're enchanted by her appearance and ignore the nonsense that comes out of her mouth. My relationship with her was a constant roller coaster. I don't know why we stayed together so long or why I agreed to have kids with her. I love my kids, and I've done a lot of therapy, parenting classes, and communication training, trying every possible way to learn how to deal with her. Nothing works. She has no respect for me and speaks to me like I'm worthless. She was in foster care and later adopted by very strict religious people. There's a long history of substance abuse in her life. I mistakenly believed that all she needed was someone to love her unconditionally. I was wrong. I can't wait for my youngest to turn 18 so I can leave this city and not have to see her every week at drop-off. When you talk to professionals as a man about being abused by a woman, they don't take you seriously. Support groups for domestic violence often treat men like outsiders. My life is peaceful now, and I'm healing from countless issues. But I'm still working to recover from everything that happened during and after that marriage. Story 7. In this situation, I was, and maybe still am, the crazy ex. My wife and I were having serious marital issues, and one day, a simple argument turned into a conversation about the deeper problems in our marriage. She started talking about not being happy and the possibility of divorce. I don't see myself as a monster. I genuinely want the best for her and her happiness. But I spiraled. My world collapsed. I'm so devoted to her that I couldn't imagine my life without her. So I sent her a farewell note via text and grabbed my 9mm handgun. I went into the master bathroom. She saw the message and came rushing in. We struggled at the door. She was trying to get in while I was trying to keep it shut. She gave up trying. The last thing I remember is holding the gun to my chin and seeing my crying reflection in the mirror. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in a hospital bed, 2 months later, missing my right eye, my mouth numb and completely confused. It felt like I'd just taken a nap. What I did was the worst and most foolish decision I've ever made. It broke my wife mentally, and she's still dealing with the trauma 10 months later. That decision took away my marriage, my eye, and nearly a year of my life in recovery. I'll carry the guilt for what I did to my family for the rest of my life. Story 8. This happened with a close friend, not a romantic partner. They were dealing with serious mental health struggles but expected me to be their only source of support. The constant threats of self-harm were wearing me down, so I had one final conversation where I told them to please seek professional help. I explained that I wasn't mentally equipped to help them and that I wasn't a professional. Then I broke off contact. Our mutual friends took my side, supported me, and also urged them to get help. But their other friends said horrible things about me, telling me that if anything happened, their blood would be on my hands. I ignored all of it and focused on taking care of myself. My friend went through a tough time and nearly ended their life, but stopped at the last minute. They got help. We never spoke again, but from what I've heard, they're doing better. I saw their profile pop up on Facebook recently, just a photo of them smiling and hugging a dog. I truly wish them all the best. They're a good person. Mental illness is incredibly difficult. Years later, I had another friend who started acting similarly, making threats, but clearly using them for attention. I set boundaries, so she redirected her behavior toward my then husband, crying for his attention. Long story short, she ended up stealing my partner and trying to ruin my life. But in the end, I built a much better life for myself. Unfortunately, she's still in the picture as my child's stepmother. She occasionally tries to take jabs at me, but I keep my distance and don't engage. She's incredibly petty and toxic. Story 9. Spousal assault is real. I went through mental, emotional, physical, sexual, financial, and verbal abuse from my ex-husband. The abuse was so severe that I was once forced to sleep on a dog bed, naked, for 2 days. When he finally strangled me during an argument and said he would end my life, I began preparing to leave. My current husband said he would come get me. It took me 6 months to prepare to leave him. When my current husband finally came to get me, on October 23, 2013, my ex-husband said something I'll never forget. His words are burned into my brain. You just took away every single reason for me to even stay and be here anymore. If you need me, I'll be hanging around Pilcher Park. Plus, I'll write a note to make sure that when they find me, they know it's your fault it happened. He left and I fell to the floor crying. I knew he'd make that kind of threat when I was leaving. I knew he was too much of a coward to actually go through with it. He used that tactic often as a form of manipulation. After I left, he ended up going to another woman's house, someone he had been involved with before getting together with me. By the end of the week, he was trying to get my former best friend to move into the house I had been paying rent for, and I later found out he had been messaging her inappropriately for most of our marriage while I was working 2 jobs. 5 years after divorcing him, he finally passed away, alone in a hospital with only his immediate family present, his mom, his sister, and her husband. He had no friends or relationship left because of how abusive he was. In the end, the drinking is what took his life. Story 10. Back in 2001, I was dating an unstable woman. At the time, I was driving a 1986 Nissan 200SX, and I had broken up with her for the 3rd and final time. She lived in an apartment complex in Asheville, and I had stayed the night at a friend's apartment in the same complex. In the morning, I left and was driving on a winding road when, all of a sudden, my front wheel flew off, and I crashed into a ditch. About 10 minutes later, this same woman drove by with her friend, got out of the car and said, "Is everything okay?" with a sort of Joker-like smile. I could never prove it was her, but I've talked to several mechanic friends over the years, and they've all said the same thing. Wheels don't just fly off unless someone loosened the lug nuts. And at the time, she was definitely unstable enough to do something like that. I should also add that she used self-harm as a way to keep me in the relationship, but 3 times was not the charm. Story 11. I had mentally checked out of the relationship for about 6 months. I did the bare minimum, stopped saying I love you, stopped spending time alone with him, and told him more than once that I didn't want to be in the relationship anymore. The final straw was when I was hanging out with my guy friends and he called me over 30 times before showing up where we were. He threatened to harm himself in the parking lot if I told him it was really over. Then he asked the three guys which one of them I was sleeping with. They told me to go back inside the restaurant, and they returned to the table about 10 minutes later. I was told that my number had been blocked on his phone and that any further contact from him would result in the police being called. He's a doctor now. I heard he dated someone very unstable for a while, and a few years later he sent me an apology email saying he never should have put me through all that. I guess she used the same tactics, and it gave him flashbacks. Story 12. When I was married, my then wife used to threaten to harm herself all the time, especially whenever there was a big event in my life. Final exams, work functions, anything related to friends. She'd find a way to cause a scene. She would make shallow cuts on her wrists, bang her head against hard surfaces, or make herself sick with small overdoses of painkillers. These behaviors were all tied to her borderline personality disorder, but at the time, I was too young and lacked the confidence or understanding to know how to deal with it. Toward the end of our very troubled marriage, she went into one of her episodes trying to hit her head on the kitchen counter. I told her, half out of desperation, to take a hammer and go out to the backyard leaf pile if she was serious, so she wouldn't make a mess in the house. There was shocked silence, and we never had another episode like that again during the few remaining months of our relationship. It's been 15 years and she's still alive. Story 13. I asked my ex for a divorce a few weeks before this happened. He kept begging me to take him back, but when I stood firm like I hadn't in the past, he exploded. He said, "Forget you, you win. I'm leaving. You get the apartment, the car, and the kids. I have nothing now. Forget you." And then stormed out of the house. I had him on Life 360, and because he had previously attempted to harm himself twice while in the military, I panicked. I do love him, but I can't ignore how he neglected our kids and how he almost let me die during my second pregnancy. Based on that, I had his brother call the police. I tried to initiate a wellness check. I've been in a mental health facility before, so I knew he'd be taken care of there. It turned out he was walking up a highway, screaming and crying, but as soon as the police arrived, he completely changed his demeanor and became calm. He was taken to the hospital, but he lied to the doctor and ended up coming back to the apartment. 2 days later, he was acting cheerful. When I once again refused to reconcile, he said, "I should have gone through with it that day, you awful person." That stuck with me. I've been staying with my grandmother for the past few months, trying to move because he keeps pulling these stunts. We live within walking distance. Every time I try to talk about custody, I get reminded that he should have ended his life, that he can't live without me, and that I should give him yet another chance, after giving him hundreds in the past 2 years alone. I don't believe him anymore when he makes threats, and I feel terrible about it. I'm keeping the mental health crisis team on standby just in case. I take these things very seriously. It's wearing on my mental health. I have major depressive disorder, PTSD, and other diagnoses. I'm working on finding a new therapist. I really hope he gets the help he needs to become the father he wants to be for our kids. And I hope this nightmare ends sooner rather than later. Story 14. I was in a very strange place mentally when we started that relationship. I think she may have manipulated me into getting into it. Some of my friends tried to warn me, but I didn't listen and went ahead anyway. After a while, she said she couldn't stay with me anymore because her parents would never approve of me. I felt sad, but I was okay. Maybe she didn't expect me to feel so little, or maybe it was something else, but she completely freaked out. She wanted to continue the relationship. I told her, "The situation with your parents isn't going to change, right? So it's a no for me." She started crying and got a little unhinged. Then she threatened to hurt herself if we didn't get back together. It was an easy no for me, especially after seeing her behavior over the last few weeks following our breakup. Then she called my friends and spread lies about me. Thankfully, none of them believed her. After that, she asked her friends to call me and try to guilt trip me. Then she got a mutual friend to send me a picture of her wrists. It looked extremely fake. I blocked her and never contacted her again. I saw her sometime later at a friend's wedding. She was married and looked completely normal. Story 15. I had been in a relationship with my emotionally unstable college girlfriend for about 5 years when it happened. I had become increasingly unhappy. The relationship was full of conflict, verbal attacks, and emotional abuse toward me. One night we were on the phone, and she tried to control who I was spending time with at work and school. I had enough. I told her I wasn't going to take it anymore, and that we were done. She broke down sobbing and said she was getting a knife from the kitchen and was going to harm herself. I hung up and called her mom, telling her to get there immediately. I started driving over myself, but I was about 30 minutes away. This was before cell phones, so I had 30 minutes to imagine what I might be walking into. When I arrived, she was safe and her mom was there. She started yelling at me to get my things, so I began loading everything I had at her place into my truck. At one point, her mom pulled me aside. I thought she was going to thank me for calling, or at least say she understood why I was leaving. Instead, she also begged me to stay with her daughter. It was surreal. When I finished gathering my stuff, I tossed my key into the living room. My ex lost it, screaming about how disrespectful I was and how she thought I was a better man than that. That was the final dramatic moment of our relationship. But she ended up pulling me back in over the next couple of months, and I stayed in that awful relationship for 2 more years, even moving to another state with her. Eventually, we truly ended it, and my life got so much better. I was finally able to redefine myself and grow in a new place. I have many stories about that relationship, but this one was the scariest. Story 16. He spent 3 days unconscious in the hospital before his family finally realized they needed to take some responsibility for him. I was done. He had emotionally blackmailed me with threats for too long, and my life had suffered because of it. I lost friends, became isolated from my family, missed job promotions, had no social life, and worked hard while he spent all my money, leaving nothing to show for it. He chose prescription drugs over me repeatedly. He lied constantly, blamed our infertility on me, refused to work, and deliberately sabotaged job interviews. He wouldn't do anything around the house or get up early unless it was to be at the pharmacy the moment it opened. When he overdosed, I was treated like a criminal because prescription drugs were involved. I was locked out of our place by the police with nothing but the clothes on my back. They even changed the locks, even though it was temporary work housing provided by my employer during relocation. I had nowhere to go in a place I didn't know. I was summoned to the hospital and told the doctor he had been abusive and that I wanted nothing to do with him. They tried to give me his medication, but I laughed and threw it on the floor. The doctor was actually very kind and understanding. I gave her his mom's number and told her what she needed to know. At that point, I hadn't even realized it was an overdose. It had become so normal. The doctor was the one who explained this was, in fact, a serious overdose and not typical behavior. I received an apology from his entire family. They were completely on my side, and I'm still on good terms with them. It was an 11-year relationship, 5 of which we were married, and I was finally free. My family expected me to fall apart, but instead I got our house on the market, filed for divorce, and went out and celebrated for the first time in years. 2 months later, I met the love of my life and have been living a dream ever since. That was 7 years ago. I've now been married for 5 years and have a 3.5-year-old. I told my ex that if he ever gave me trouble, things would get worse for him and that I'd come after him for everything, even though he had no income or assets. The threat worked, especially since his family was on my side. Story 17. We broke up after another one of his abusive outbursts, and I told him to stay away from me. I blocked his number. A short while later, he emailed me a photo suggesting he had taken a bottle of pills. I called 911 immediately. He later called me from the hospital and told me he wanted me out of his life. A few days after that, he appeared to have some sort of spiritual awakening. He took responsibility for years of abusive behavior. I reluctantly went back to him because I so badly wanted to believe he had truly changed. But just a few weeks later, he reverted to his usual behavior: overwhelming hostility, name-calling, threats, and emotional abuse. That was the final straw. I ended it for good. This happened very recently. I hope he genuinely gets better someday and finds peace. But it became painfully clear to me that being with him would always mean constant misery, no matter how deeply I loved him. Story 18. I had to help them through a panic attack. Then they began saying threatening things that made me extremely anxious, but I forced myself to stay calm and strong. They asked me to remain friends with them until they found a replacement for me. I agreed, because I was afraid of what they might do otherwise. After a while, the same recurring issues in our relationship came up again. They went back to being emotionally cruel and even got into an argument with my friends. We had another fight, and then they blocked me on almost every platform. I haven't heard from them since. but I know they're still alive. That moment was very traumatic for me, but I keep reminding myself of this. You are not responsible for someone else's life in situations like that. At least that's what I tell myself now, and it gives me a bit of peace. Story 19. I was the one who made a suicide threat. I won't go into too many details about the relationship, but it had turned into a very unhealthy situation. As it was falling apart, I felt like I had nowhere to turn, partly because my ex had isolated me from my friends and family throughout the relationship. During one argument, I told her how I was feeling. She responded with, "You don't have the guts to do it." That pushed me over the edge. I grabbed a kitchen knife and slashed my wrists. Thankfully, in the heat of the moment, I didn't hit anything major, just some superficial bleeding. Then I swallowed an entire bottle of, honestly, I don't even remember anymore. After that, I ran out of the house. The landlord, who lived upstairs and happened to be my ex's ex-husband, called the police. They found me several neighborhoods away and brought me to the psychiatric ward, where I spent just over a week. It was there that I was officially diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I had unknowingly been living with it for years without treatment because I didn't have medical insurance. The hospital helped set me up with an affordable plan, ongoing outpatient therapy, and a mental health specialist. That was about 7 or 8 years ago. Since then, through difficult self-reflection and therapy, I've learned to understand myself and the nature of my disorder. I'm much healthier now and in a stable, loving relationship. While I still have dark moments, I now recognize the warning signs and have the tools and the people to help me through them. Story 20. I was only 15 and he had just turned 18. To keep it brief, I wasn't in that relationship by choice, and it never truly felt like a relationship to me. I never treated it like one. About 2 months after we met, he started telling me that this wasn't how relationships were supposed to work, even though I had already told him multiple times that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. He began love-bombing me in response, and I started to feel like I was being stalked. He didn't live far away, but he constantly showed up uninvited. Everything he gave me was left in our mailbox by hand, which meant he was always around. Sometimes he'd even knock on my window, then complain when I told him I was busy and didn't want him to come over. The gifts got more expensive, and I felt so suffocated that I couldn't take it anymore. So I told him to meet me at a local hangout spot in our small village, the tram station. I told him I wanted to break up. He threw a fit, begged me not to do it, and refused to accept it. I just wanted to go home. It was late and cold. One of the trams pulled in, and he suddenly screamed that he was going to jump and that it would be my fault. My first feeling was guilt and intense fear. I thought it really might be my fault if something happened. But the tram was moving slowly, and it stopped a meter before reaching him. The driver got out and threatened to call the police, assuming he was under the influence. My ex apologized repeatedly. For context, the platform is centered, and trams can arrive from both directions. I was still shaken up. He had actually tried. But when he threatened to do it again with the next tram, I couldn't take it seriously anymore. I just walked home. A few days later, I received a letter from him begging me to take him back. More days passed, and another letter arrived. This one insulting me and saying I'd never find anyone else, as punishment for what he claimed he would do. A few months later, my mother ran into his mother. He was still alive. I saw him again when I was around 20. To this day, seeing someone jump near train tracks has stuck with me, and I still struggle to stand near the edge of underground subway platforms. Story 21. I was in a very dark place emotionally during my last relationship, and I told him that I was struggling with suicide thoughts. I didn't feel like myself the entire time we were together. Honestly, I thought I might not survive after the breakup. But the truth is, I also felt like that even before it ended. 2 or 3 months before the relationship ended, I told him directly. I felt suicidal, had no reason to live, nothing made me happy, and I wasn't looking forward to anything in the future. I would walk past the street and feel tempted to throw myself in front of a car. When I looked out the window, I felt the urge to jump. I even thought about harming myself in more serious ways. The breakup itself was incredibly messy. During the relationship, I kept reassuring him, telling him he didn't have to be afraid to leave me. I'd be okay. But in the end, after a full month of silence from him, while I was physically sick and in pain, he finally told me it was over. I felt completely hopeless. I missed him for that entire month. After the breakup, I felt like a shell of myself for a week. I had overwhelming urges to jump out the window, but eventually I started to focus on myself, my hobbies, my friends, and I realized something important. The relationship had made me feel this way. I don't blame him entirely, but I'm so glad it's over. Looking back, his trust issues, the little things that never felt right, the poor communication, the emotional games, the lack of effort, and the disrespect for boundaries, all of it created constant stress. I couldn't even look forward to my future. I felt judged and pushed anytime I failed at something. I wish him well. I don't think he's a bad person, but I'm so thankful he's no longer part of my life. I wish I could forget he ever was. Story 22. He was my first boyfriend. It meant a lot to me to break up with him in person, but the night I tried to, he threatened to end his life. He went to the kitchen to grab a knife. I tried to stop him, but he was stronger and eventually got a hold of it. I begged him to stop and told him I would stay. So I stayed, unhappy and scared. I remember feeling so terrified that something like that would happen again, that I decided to do whatever it took to keep him happy. He would complain that I spent too much time with friends, so I stopped seeing them. I became deeply depressed. We had countless arguments. It took me a full year to realize I had completely lost myself. It felt like I was the one who died that night. Eventually, I broke up with him through a long text message. I wrote everything I had to say until there was nothing left. I also messaged his friends to make sure he wouldn't be alone. I just knew that if I gave him another chance to speak to me, he would manipulate me into staying, so I blocked him completely. Story 23. I had an ex who would repeatedly threaten to hurt himself if I even considered leaving him. It was my first truly toxic and damaging relationship. 2 years full of emotional manipulation and constant stress. He faked having dissociative identity disorder to the point where he'd tell long, detailed stories about his so-called alters, and 2 of them would conveniently text me anytime we had an argument or he wanted to cause drama. He also faked having schizophrenia, a mental illness I genuinely live with, just to try and relate to me. Years later, I spoke to him and got closure, and he admitted it was all a lie to manipulate me. As our relationship worsened around the 2-year mark, I finally told him I didn't want to be together anymore. I was tired of the chaos, tired of worrying about mental illnesses that weren't even real, and tired of sacrificing my well-being. In response, he harmed himself, cutting his wrists all the way up to his shoulders, and sent me graphic photos of it. He would send terrifying pictures and have violent phone calls where I could hear him punching walls and screaming that if I ever left, he wouldn't stop the bleeding next time. I was exhausted. I started to rebel, doing things he hated, like smoking, and spiraled into a dark place. Eventually, I told his parents what was going on. I couldn't carry it anymore. I cut him out of my life completely. Months later, I found out from him and one of his former friends that he had cheated on me repeatedly during our relationship and even threatened his own friends not to talk to me or he'd hurt them. He's apparently doing fine now and has a new girlfriend. I wouldn't be surprised if he's manipulating her too. I'm just glad it's finally over. Story 24. Predictably, he only said it to get me to come back. I left him after a couple of years together. He was the kind of person who took everything personally. Once he sent me a tabloid article claiming that all women secretly hate men and told me that it confirmed what he always knew, that I hated him too. Ironically, he had already told me, unprompted, that he hated me while we were on vacation together. He also told me he was never attracted to me and had been trying to pursue another woman behind my back. The worst part, he had tried to get me pregnant without my consent. My leaving wasn't really about love lost. It was a blow to his ego. He stalked me a couple of times and even called my parents' landline, threatening to harm himself while speaking with them. Thankfully, this was over a decade ago. From what I've heard, he had a child with someone else, and that relationship ended before the child's first birthday. I just hope he didn't pull the same tricks on her. Story 25. This happened to me, 36 million, when I was a teenager. My girlfriend at the time threatened to hurt herself if we broke up. One day after a serious argument where I told her I was reaching my limit and didn't know what else to do, she called and asked me to come over to talk. We stood in her driveway as we spoke. She became extremely emotional, yelling and throwing herself on the ground. As I began to walk away, she grabbed beer bottles from the outside trash can and started smashing them in the driveway, screaming that she was going to harm herself. I panicked and ran inside her house to call her dad. He worked just 3 blocks away and arrived quickly. By the time he got there, she was stomping barefoot on broken glass. The neighbor had called the police, and they arrived just a few minutes later. She tried to run, bleeding feet and all, but the officers restrained her. They tased her, tackled her, and handcuffed her. EMS arrived, took her to the hospital, and she was eventually admitted to a state psychiatric facility for several months. I had been warning her parents for weeks that she wasn't okay and needed professional help, but they wrote it off as teenage rebellion. After her hospitalization and diagnosis with multiple mental health conditions, they finally understood. Years later, she reached out and asked to meet. I met her and her husband at a local restaurant, and we talked for a while. She apologized. I told her I never held any of it against her, and that I was just happy she finally got the help she needed. We kept in touch for a while, but unfortunately, she was still unpredictable. If she forgot her medication, she'd have episodes and send me strange, far-fetched messages. Eventually, I had to cut her out of my life for good. Story 26. I tried to break up with him a few times before it finally stuck. A family member had taken their life about 5 years earlier, so it was hard not to take his threats seriously. But after so many instances of him threatening harm whenever I disagreed with him, along with other abusive behaviors like breaking my things, punching holes in walls, and isolating me from my friends and family, I finally ended it for good. He threatened sue us again, so I called his mom and told her what he was saying. I also said I might call an ambulance. She begged me not to, explaining that he'd been doing this kind of thing since he was a teenager and that neither of them could afford the ambulance bill. She just came and picked him up herself and took him back to her place. A few days later, she helped him move out. Since then, he's been arrested 3 times, once for domestic violence against the girlfriend after me, and twice for angry public outbursts that involved destroying property and threatening people. I'm very glad I got out when I did. Story 27. This isn't about an ex, but my mom told me she was going to take her life about a month ago. She said I would remember that conversation forever, and that it would haunt me. She said it was my fault and that I'd regret it, then hung up. To clarify, it was my fault because I didn't go over to her house to set up her Christmas tree. I didn't go because she had already been yelling at me about other things, and everything with her is always a confrontation. I didn't hear anything from her for weeks. I had no idea if she was alive. Everyone else in her life has walked away because of this behavior, so there was no one else to check on her. She eventually reached out again, wondering why I hadn't called, and said she was worried. She never brought up what she had said or offered any kind of apology. Right now, I'm planning an intervention with my siblings. If she doesn't accept responsibility for her actions, I'll probably have to cut off communication completely. Story 28. Oh boy, my relationship was toxic. I'll admit it. I once threatened to harm myself to guilt my ex into staying. I had severe issues at the time. After he broke up with me, I began reflecting on what happened and realized how wrong I was for making that threat. But he was far from innocent too. He cheated on me, made threats, isolated me from my family and friends, and even told my friends they deserved to get sick just for standing up for me. About 2 weeks after we broke up, and I had already moved on, he sent my friends a picture from his Snapchat story. He asked them to show it to me. It was a photo of his desk with blood, scissors, and visible self-harm. I told my friend, tell him to stop, but also tell him I don't care. I knew it was a guilt trip, but it wasn't going to work anymore. I messaged him from a secondary Facebook account he forgot to block and wrote, "You broke up with me. I'm telling you now that I'm grateful for that. But seriously, get help, or I'll call someone for your safety." I got counseling after that. I don't make those kinds of threats anymore. I've learned to process my emotions in healthier ways. He's still alive. We bumped into each other once, and he tried talking to me like nothing had happened. No, we're not on speaking terms. It's for the best that I leave all of that in the past. Story 29. My ex was extremely upset, so I offered to go home with her because I didn't want her driving alone in that state. I knew it was a mistake the moment we got on the dual carriageway. She started saying she wanted to end it all and began swerving the car. It was the longest 10-mile journey of my life. I was walking a tightrope, trying not to lead her on, but also not fully committing to ending things while we were in the car. Every time things didn't go her way, she'd veer dangerously, then straighten out when I calmed her. I couldn't drive at the time, so my only strategy was to keep her believing there might still be hope and to take the blame so she'd keep the car on the road. When we arrived at her parents' house, I bolted before the car even came to a full stop. I thought I had left her behind, but I was wrong. I endured a few years of passive-aggressive stalking before I was truly free of her. After watching Fatal Attraction, I finally understood the bunny boiler reference. I'm convinced that if I hadn't kept calm during that ride, she would have crashed the car. Story 30. My ex threatened to end his life in the weirdest way I've ever seen. He used to smoke, then got pneumonia and nearly died. After that, he quit and swore off anything that might harm his lungs. But when I broke up with him, before he moved out, he made a dramatic entrance into my bedroom holding a pack of cigarettes. He announced that he was going to slowly end his life, and this was his chosen method. He was furious when I just shrugged and told him that it wasn't my problem anymore, and that he should probably consider therapy. Over 2 years later, I ran into him at an event. Obviously, he was still alive, and still clearly resented me for breaking up with him. That's fine with me. If he truly wanted to marry me, maybe he shouldn't have acted like a lazy man-child, taken financial advantage of me for 2 years, spent all his money on junk and fast food, trashed my house, and refused to hold down a job. Story 31. My incredibly mentally abusive ex did the same thing to me. I spent 5 years being gaslit, manipulated, and turned into a shell of who I used to be. We got together when I was really young, just 19, and I was incredibly naive at the time. He always blamed me for his mental health. He told me to go to therapy, so I did. But when I suggested he should do the same, he said I was betraying him. He constantly made comments about my weight and pressured me to exercise so I wouldn't get fat. For 3 out of the 5 years, he told me that if I ever left him, he'd end his life. He even assaulted one of my friends. He hated himself and had no ambition. His plan was to do nothing and wait for his parents to pass away so he could inherit their money. I finally left after the incident with my friend. After that, he stalked me for months, showing up at my door asking to come inside. I never let him in, and I always made sure someone else was home with me. He made inappropriate comments about sleeping with my friends, who didn't even like him. And one time, he even asked if he could help break in my new bed. The last time I saw him, he showed up at my door again, saying he was Suic. I was so done with the manipulation that I just told him to talk to his therapist and slam the door. Not long after, I moved across the country. As far as I know, he's still alive, alone, and miserable. I'm now happily engaged, living in a city I love, surrounded by wonderful friends. I've done everything he told me not to do, got every tattoo he said I wasn't allowed to get, and I'm more unapologetically myself than ever. Story 32. I was 21, she was 23. Sorry this is long, just needed to tell it right. We'd been together since we were 10 and 12. Childhood friends turned into soulmates. We never had issues. Life was great, even when we were doing absolutely nothing. At the time, I was living in North Carolina and got offered a job as a fitter, charm welder with ExxonMobil in Baytown, Texas. She was working as a pharmacy tech while in school to become a certified pharmacist. She's incredibly smart, so she couldn't just drop everything and move. I struggled with the decision for a week, but ultimately decided to go. I was young, making great money, and wanted to build a future with her. My plan was to propose when I came back in a year. I figured if we could survive that distance, we could survive anything. 5 months into Texas, every day dragged. We missed each other more than we'd anticipated. She had a hectic schedule, and I worked 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. Visits were almost impossible. We FaceTimed most nights, though. One night, around 2 a.m., she called me in a panic. She broke down and told me she'd been having terrible anxiety attacks every day since I left. It crushed me. I got in my truck and drove to downtown Houston. I took her on a virtual walk through the city. Just to calm her down, it worked. Her eyes relaxed and I felt a glow in my heart. I told her I'd see her soon, that I'd give all of this up for her. But 2 months later, everything changed. One night, I noticed something was off. She couldn't hide emotions well. After pressing her, she told me we couldn't be together anymore. She said she felt like she was holding me back. Our only difference had been that she wanted to stay in our hometown, and I wanted to explore the world. She said she saw how happy I was in Texas and didn't want to be the one to stop me. We were on the phone for 8 hours and 26 minutes. The last hour was both of us crying, me begging her not to end it. I said I'd come home right then and there if she'd just wait. That was the second to last time we spoke. The next month of my life was a blur of self-destruction. $500 a day on alcohol, weed, and anything else to numb the pain. I couldn't sleep, and when I did, I woke up crying. I know I dreamed of her. I could feel her even if I didn't remember. 2 days before returning to North Carolina, I hit rock bottom. I hadn't eaten in over a week, hadn't slept in 4 days. At 5 a.m., I wandered into the woods behind my apartment, carrying a rigging choker I'd borrowed from a coworker and left him $200 for. I hadn't left a note and didn't even close my apartment door. I found a tree, climbed over a wire fence and said one last thing. I love you, mi amor. I'll be waiting for you. Then I heard a voice. Your mama loves you, son. God loves you. Did you know that? I thought I was hallucinating. As I set up a makeshift stool and tightened the choker, I heard again. Are you crazy? What are you doing, boy? I looked up. There was an old man in a deer stand, staring at me with deep concern. I couldn't speak. I was stunned. What were the odds? He climbed down and said, Man, are you okay? What are you doing out here? He gave me a friendly punch to the arm. I broke down. I told him everything. We talked for over an hour. Turns out he owned that land and was hunting before heading to the church where he was a pastor. That moment saved my life. I'm no longer an atheist. Fast forward 8 years, 2022. She's 30, I'm 28. I live in Pennsylvania. I continued welding, traveled to 36 states, and she became a pharmacist. She bought a house next to her grandparents in our hometown. She reached out once in 2019, sent me a photo from our trip to Myrtle Beach. She said, I'll keep this forever, so I have this picture in my hands and you in my heart. I'll always love you. She doesn't know about what happened in the woods. We've both stayed single. I still haven't given up hope. I'd wait 2 lifetimes if I had to. Story 33. I dated a guy for maybe 4 months while I was home for the summer. When I went back across the country for college, he completely lost it. He threatened to blackmail me, show up at my parents' house, and said he would take his life. I was so overwhelmed that I called my parents crying. It was the first major relationship issue I'd ever experienced. They told me to ignore him and reminded me how much they love me, you know? Basic parent support. Since I went back to school 2 weeks before the semester started, I only had one friend out there. Thank goodness for him. He supported me in blocking and removing this toxic person from my life and reminded me that his actions weren't my responsibility. This happened years ago. I ended up checking his Facebook recently and saw that he started his own company doing something he loves. Hopefully, I gave him some kind of wake-up call about how unhinged he had become. Story 34. I've got 2 stories. One is mine, and the other is from a friend. First, my story. This happened over 20 years ago. I went on a date with a guy I knew from high school. We weren't close, just knew of each other. Long story short, he tried to assault me, and I got away. 2 days later, he sent me several emails, maybe 4 to 6, saying he had been in love with me since high school and a bunch of other nonsense. I replied once, saying, no means no, and to never contact me again. Then he sent over 8 more emails saying that if I didn't agree to be his girlfriend, he would take his own life. I freaked out, marked the emails as spam, and blocked him. That same day, he started blowing up my phone. I never answered. I was living with my parents and didn't tell them everything, just that he was acting crazy and wouldn't leave me alone. After a few weeks of nonstop calls, my mom answered the phone and told him I had moved out of state. He believed her. Years later, I learned this was a pattern. He had done similar things to multiple girls since high school, made them feel unsafe, and then threatened self-harm when they rejected him. Many girls reported him to campus police, but the university did nothing. However, word spread quickly, and he became completely ostracized. Now for the second story, this happened recently, and I'm still furious about it. My friend, 63 million, is a great guy. He's a veteran and owns a small business. He had been looking to hire help for a while. My boyfriend's niece, 19, had been crying to me that she couldn't find work after being laid off from her warehouse job. I asked my friend if he was still hiring, and he said yes. He invited her over for an interview and trial run, and afterward, he offered her the job, with better pay than she had before, and gave her all the details for her first day. This next part I didn't find out about until recently. She began texting him flirtatiously. He tried to be kind but made it clear he wasn't interested and told her he had 8 kids her age or older. Then she started sending him inappropriate photos. He asked her to stop. That's when she threatened to harm herself if he didn't become her sugar daddy. When he refused again, she threatened to ruin his life. He blocked her and saved all her texts as evidence. She later texted me, without me knowing any of this, and claimed he had offered her money in exchange for favors. He showed me all the messages, including her threats. I was beyond angry. I contacted her grandmother, my boyfriend's mom, since I didn't have her mother's number, and told her everything. Turns out this isn't the first time she's done something like this. When she doesn't get what she wants, or when she wants attention, she threatens to harm herself. She even made inappropriate advances toward her own older brothers. Her parents had briefly put her in therapy, but stopped when she said she was fine. I told her I knew the truth and cut contact. I blocked her completely. Story 35. We'd been on and off 5 times over 5 years, starting when I was 19. The 4th breakup had a pretty clear reason. He spent the night with another woman, then came to my job and dropped off 24 red roses without explanation. Later, he made a lunch date with me a block away from work, only to stand me up. I found him sitting with her at a sidewalk cafe nearby. Okay, dude, I can take a hint. I gave up for real. I moved to another state and got married. If that marriage had worked, I'd never have seen him again. But life had other plans. We moved back into town, and suddenly this guy, who had always been emotionally distant, was sobbing and telling me how devastated he was about losing me. I'd always cared more, so it felt like a dream to hear him finally say it, like getting something you thought was impossible. I left my husband to go back to him. Honestly, it wasn't a bad move. My husband at the time was abusive, but this guy wouldn't get a job. He lived off me, spent his days playing video poker while I worked, and did nothing to contribute. I tolerated it for about a year before realizing I'd been conned. He just wanted someone to bankroll him, and I was the target. He talked about wanting a baby someday. Absolutely not. He'd already decided it would be a daughter, picked out her name, and even told me I'd be jealous of how close they'd be. Hard pass. He claimed that if I left again, he'd be suicidal. I left anyway. Last I heard, he was still alive, just busy talking badly about me to everyone we'd ever known. Once I snapped out of it, I realized he probably never loved me. He just needed a woman to fit his plans. Story 36. Backstory. I met this guy on an LGBT amino app because I was a scared, closeted teen in a religious environment. I was 16 when we met, and he was 21. Red flag, I know. We stayed friends for 2 years, and when I turned 18, things started to get weird. We had met in person once before, but I was already anxious since it was my first time meeting someone from online. He invited me to his hotel room to give me a gift. I declined and waited in the lobby until he returned because I just didn't feel safe, even though I trusted him at the time. After I turned 18, we met up again to hang out. For some reason, he thought it was a date. I was oblivious. Even when he kissed me on the cheek, I thought he was just being friendly. He started getting oddly protective, saying that other guys were looking at me and liked me. Looking back, it all feels incredibly creepy and uncomfortable. Later on, I asked out my then boyfriend, and now fiancé of 4 years. And we really clicked. Same age, same city, similar life experiences. I told the other guy about my crush, and he lost it. He accused me of manipulating him, called me a heartbreaker and a player. He kept blocking me and then re-adding me, sending me messages threatening to harm himself, then disappearing for days. Twice I had to call the police because of what he was saying. He got angry when placed on suicide watch. I still have nightmares about it, especially one time when he sent me a photo of a bridge and a rope. He stopped replying afterward, and I stayed up until 4 a.m. on the phone with the police trying to locate him. They found him, thankfully, but it was terrifying. He even messaged my fiancée once, trying to paint me as manipulative. Luckily, my fiancée already knew everything and didn't fall for it. He's been blocked and deleted from all my social media. I try not to think about him, though sometimes I find myself checking obituaries to see if he's still alive. I don't want to be responsible for this man's death. Even though he now hates me, he was my only friend for so many years. Story 37. My ex constantly said she would take her life if we broke up. She was emotionally abusive and treated me like her personal therapist and support system at 15, at the cost of my own mental health. I started drinking heavily and self-harming from the stress of her calling me around the clock. I was studying nursing at university and would still have to coach her through breakdowns constantly. I stopped seeing my own family and friends. Eventually, she went off to university several hours away, and one night after another incident landed her in the emergency room, I convinced her to go visit her family so she'd be safe. Then I called her and ended things, cutting off all contact. I also contacted her family to keep them in the loop. Her parents didn't seem to care at all, but her adult siblings did and helped her through it. I blocked her on everything and haven't heard from her since. It still weighs heavily on me, but after everything she put me through, I know reaching out again would not be good for either of us. I genuinely hope she's okay. Story 38. I had an ex-friend who told me he was going to take his life and said he had tried before, but survived. I was very supportive and tried to help him as best I could. We were online friends. After he shared that with me, he started saying that I was the reason he was going to harm himself, because I wasn't playing enough video games with him or spending enough time with him online. I had a full-time job and he didn't work. We also had different tastes in games, so naturally we did our own thing most of the time. He started idolizing me, saying really uncomfortable things that made me feel weird about our friendship. Over time, it got worse. He pressured me constantly, saying that if I didn't play with him or spend time with him, it would trigger him. It really messed with my head and still does sometimes. The final straw came when he accused me of having secret Discord servers just to avoid him, which was completely false. He also lashed out at others in our friend group who weren't even involved. I finally told him that if he calmed down and wanted to talk things over, we could try, but that the friendship was basically over because I felt like I was being emotionally manipulated all the time. That was a few months ago. We haven't spoken since. The whole situation had dragged on for years. I haven't heard anything from him, and honestly, I hope he's okay, but I also hope he's getting real help now. Story 39. I can't even remember how many times he threatened to end his life every time I tried to break up with him. Whenever I tried to walk away, he would follow me, yelling and trying to force me to go back with him to his place. He didn't work or lied about working. He lied about his ethnic background, lied about nearly everything. His mom once told me that he had been diagnosed with a form of antisocial personality disorder. This was over 10 years ago, so I don't recall all the details. And he even lied about that too. I had bruises and took photos of them, which he later deleted from my phone. He once tried to take my birth control pills from me. He stole money, constantly flirted with other women, and was overall the worst person I ever dated. My saving grace was moving abroad for university, I'm European, and the distance made him lose interest. I stayed single for years afterward to understand how I ended up in such an abusive relationship and how to make sure it never happened again. Of course, he never went through with any of his threats. But he did stalk me, blew up my phone constantly and kept creating new social media accounts after I blocked him, even pretending to be someone else. He once tried to convince me he was dying in a hospital. We separated at the end of 2013, and the last time he contacted me was in 2021. I truly hope I never hear from him again. Story 40. I was that ex. I was incredibly unstable, especially toward the end of the relationship. I was verbally abusive, and in hindsight, that most likely led to emotional abuse as well. There was no cheating or physical violence, but I said a lot of hurtful things, which was even more damaging because her love language was words of affirmation. After the breakup, I realized the harm I had caused and sought professional help. I started both group and individual therapy, which helped me understand the things I didn't see back then that were causing pain, not only to her, but to myself too. It's been a few years, and I've continued doing the work. I'm now aware of my old habits and actively trying to shift my mindset. Back then, I didn't know better. Now I do, and I'm trying to be better. I took her for granted. The things she suggested during the relationship are the very things I've since implemented into my life. We haven't spoken since, and I've respected her boundaries. I know she's with someone else now. I don't know the details, and I don't want to go down that road. This is the bed I made, and now I have to lie in it. I regret how things went, but the past can't be changed.